All right. Well, happy Tuesday. I hope you had a really nice long weekend. Today, we are going to be going over the first part of the lecture on geographic landforms. And so, what I would like you guys to do is to get out a piece of paper and a pencil, or make a Google Doc on your computer, whatever's works best for you. Or you're even welcome to just follow along on just on the screen. Listen to me the best you can, and then go back later to the notes on Schoology. However, I think for most of your brains, it's probably best if you write or type stuff down as I go through, put examples, and that way you'll remember it better. But totally up to you, whatever you think is best. Okay, so you can kind of look at the whole picture here, and you can see a lot, not all, and I don't have all of these on here, but you can kind of get a picture of the different geographical, physical features of what we're going to be going over as we go through this PowerPoint. Okay, so the first physical feature that we're going to talk about, or geographical landform, is called an isthmus. So an isthmus is a narrow strip of land that connects two larger bodies or pieces of land. You can see at the top of the picture the large piece of land. At the bottom, kind of right-hand part of the picture, you can see the other piece of land. And then in the middle, where the kind of like houses or apartments are, you can see the isthmus that spans the two. Now, historically, countries and cities and stuff like that, they really worked hard to control these isthmuses. And you'll see later the same thing with a strait, because if you controlled that isthmus historically, you controlled the trade or the people that kind of came and gone through that place. And if you taxed people or taxed trade that came through there, you could make a lot of money. So historically, these isthmuses like this, or you'll see a little bit later straits, they're of geographical importance. Now, probably the most famous of the isthmuses that we have in the Western Hemisphere would be the Isthmus of Panama. Now, remember that every time that I give you a term in this class, I would like you to have at least one example or application of it. Sometimes you can have more, but at least get one down. And so really the entire country of Panama, you could argue, is an isthmus. And certainly it's an important one for us as we eventually dig a canal across it and use it to transport billions of dollars worth of trade. We can move our Navy, our military forces from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean. And so this Isthmus of Panama is what we call in geography a choke point. It's an important place, a narrow place where ships have to go through. And so, that's a very valuable piece of property. Okay, kind of the water version of an isthmus would be something called a strait. So here you're looking at the example of the Strait of Gibraltar. And the Strait of Gibraltar is, kind of spanning between Europe and North Africa. So you can see where the red circle is, kind of the left side of the picture is Spain, and then the right side of the picture is North Africa. And on a clear day, these North Africa and Spain are probably about as far as it is from here to the Rocky Mountains. And so on a clear day, you can see the Rocky Mountains. On a clear day, you could see, southward from Spain looking to North Africa. So it's not a very wide area. And then you can see as it empties to the top of the picture, that's the Mediterranean Sea. And towards the bottom left-hand side of the picture is the Atlantic Ocean. And so again, any country that controlled that Strait of Gibraltar, which for a lot of modern history has been the British, believe it or not the Spanish, they control that trade that goes through there. Okay, the next one is called the peninsula, and you guys are probably pretty familiar with this one because we have an entire state, the state of Florida, that is pretty much a peninsula. And so the only difference between a peninsula and an island is that in an island, you've got land surrounded by water on all sides, on all four sides. In a peninsula, the key difference is that you have land surrounded by water on three sides. And so you can see that in the picture. Okay, and there's an island. And obviously, I took a few indulgences with this picture. Not exactly a real island. In fact, I think if you look close enough, you'll see Nemo towards the bottom of the picture. But an island is going to be land surrounded by water on all four sides. any island that you know of is good for you to use for an example. So I would like to encourage you to try to come up with an example on your own. But if not, we can use the famous example in New York of Long Island, where Manhattan is. Now, what happens if we get a group of islands together in a place? We call that an archipelago. Okay, so please try not to say it as an archipelago or something like that. It is pronounced archipelago. And so an archipelago is a group or chain of islands. And you guys probably know that we have an entire state, one of our 50 states, that is an archipelago, and that's the state of Hawaii, as you can see on the right-hand side. Other places that would be notable archipelagos would be Indonesia, which is probably the largest archipelago in the world, like 13,000 islands that make up one country. The Philippines, Japan, the Bahamas, those are all just a few examples of an archipelago. All right, the next group of definitions and concepts are going to have to do something with a river. And so whenever we talk about the beginning of the river, a river always starts somewhere. And typically that's high, way up in the mountains somewhere where there's kind of a little basin or a collecting area. And so the example that we're going to use is going to be the Continental Divide. And if you guys know the Continental Divide up there by Loveland Pass or Eisenhower Tunnel, the big long tunnel up there in our Rocky Mountains, that's really kind of the source of several different rivers. So that's kind of our source, the beginning of a river. All right, so eventually as the source, let me just go back really quickly, as the source collects that water into low points, there you can see towards the middle of the picture, the water collecting the low points. The more of these little, what are called tributaries. Tributaries are smaller bodies of water that empty into larger bodies of water. And so on my picture, you can see a small little tributary on the left emptying into a larger little river on the right. And eventually that river will empty into another river and probably another river until eventually it flows out to an ocean. All right, so a river is a naturally occurring body of water that flows, and that's kind of the big difference between like a lake or reservoirs. Lakes and reservoirs don't really have a flow to them because they're fairly level. But a river has a change in elevation, which causes, because of gravity, it causes it to move, down in an elevation. And so typically that's how we denote a river. Now rivers, like I said, they collect in low spots, in low elevations, and they move constantly on the continent to where the lowest elevation is. So if you were to take a look at our country, it's going to flow, like all the ones east of the Rocky Mountains are going to flow down and down and down until they get to the Mississippi River, which is really kind of the lowest point of the continent east of the Rocky Mountains, and then it will eventually empty into the Gulf of Mexico. Now, again, in terms of a tributary, almost all rivers end up being tributaries to another river, and you could argue that even like the Mississippi River is a tributary. It's a tributary to the Gulf of Mexico. All right, a valley. So valleys are something that you will see around Colorado if you will just pay attention. Valleys typically are made by glaciers. And then when those glaciers, probably, I don't know, at least tens of thousands of years ago, maybe even perhaps millions of years ago, but probably during the last ice age, which was probably 10 to 15,000 years ago, big, huge sheets of ice moved down in elevation. And as gravity pushed them downwards, they carved out these big, huge U-looking valleys. And then, of course, they all have a low point. And so anything that is above them, if they have snow on there, it will melt and collect in this low area. And then that river that you see at the bottom will, over hundreds or thousands of years, continue to carve that valley. So that's a great example of a valley. All right, and then it's an extreme view, and this is probably not made by a glacier, but simply by the river cutting through rock, would be something called a canyon. Now, a canyon is unlike a valley. A valley is kind of shaped in a U-type shape, but a canyon typically is going to be in the shape of kind of a steep V, like you can see here. So if we go back, the place where I grew up in Grand Junction was known as the Grand Valley. So that's a good example for you guys to use if you didn't catch a valley. There's some other ones as well. Probably the most famous valley in our country is called Death Valley, but you're welcome to use Grand Valley, or if you know another valley. In terms of the canyon, I'm sure that probably the example most of you would put down would be the Grand Canyon. And so a canyon is a deep valley, steep valley with steep sides caused by a river cutting through it. And it's kind of weird to think that, with a river going through that rock, it probably took thousands and thousands and thousands of years to be able to make that particular shape. But by the time it's done, you have this V-shaped, very steep looking canyon. It resembles a valley, but again, if I go back to a valley, you can see the slopes are much more gentle, and with a canyon, it's very steep. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to stop because you guys are about, almost halfway through the lecture. And from this point on, you're going to do an assignment called Atlas Skills. And Mr. Lukenhaus will be explaining to you guys how to do Atlas Skills, but you're going to need to partner up, and you're going to need to use an atlas, and you'll follow the directions. But what I've given you so far will get you through about half of the assignment. So I think there's 10 total places and things you need to find on the assignment. I've given you information to get through 5 of those 10. And so when I come back, we'll do the other 5. We'll finish up the last part of Atlas Skills, but you need to get started by doing the first part. All right, so I will let Mr. Lukenhaus take over from here. Thank you for paying attention. And please, if you missed anything, help yourself by going back to Schoology, go into the Unit 1 folder, go into Notes and Lectures, and you can find my PowerPoint for Geographic Landforms. All right, thank you. Goodbye.